All right. Well, again, thank you for joining us today. This is our second of three conversations called COVID Conversations with Whitestone Resources. And today we're going to be talking about all things related to family and relationships in the midst of all things COVID. And so today with us, we have three wonderful panelists from outside of Emmanuel Church, and they are from Whitestone Resources. And so Raymond Wunderlich is one of our counselors here today, and he'll be sharing. We also have Carla Reyes-Lurie, and she'll be a part of our panel. And then we will round out, Christy Toland is our third panelist for today. From Emmanuel, kind of our co-host today is myself. I'm Brian Bickett, the pastor of Group Life at Emmanuel Church, and then Heather Welch, who helps me in all that I do and helps out with congregational care and a bunch of other things. So, but you're not on to hear me talk about me. You're on here to get some of those questions answered. And so I'm just going to jump right in, and we're going to start talking about this whole thing of emotions and relationships first as it deals with ourself, and then how we can then deal with those in our life. Again, as a reminder, last week was all about dealing with anxiety and fear that comes up from this. So if you didn't join us last week, that's on our website. You can view the whole video of it last week. But we did want to start off addressing that question off the top of the bat. So here's the question that came in, and we're going to go right in. First is, how do I keep myself calm and not from being so anxious in the midst of all that's going on? Sometimes I just feel like I'm dying inside. So that's how some people are feeling, and it's a very real thing. So Christy, if you just want to jump in and kind of give your thoughts on that question. Oh, Christy, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, can you do that? Nice. Yes. I'm not the only one.
I know. So what I was saying was scripture can be very encouraging to turn to during these very stressful times. And one verse that is definitely of comfort to me comes from Lamentations, chapter 3, 22 and 23. It's a very familiar verse, and it talks about how the Lord's mercies are new every morning and how his faithfulness is great to us. And so that verse always encourages me because, some days are a little bit easier than others. Some days are a little bit more challenging, but God's word tells me that God's mercies are there for me in whatever I'm experiencing. So I would encourage you to turn to that verse or any other verse that can be of comfort to you.
And just kind of personally, how have you seen that work out for yourself? I know I'm kind of throwing a curveball on that, but just why has that been the verse that's just been good for you?
Well, I mean, with younger kids, you never know how they're going to be feeling. And especially when everything got started, having to adjust to starting school at home, working at home, and just all the other hats that I could do on my own time colliding together, it felt overwhelming sometimes. But when I turned to this verse, it just assured me that God saw my days, and no matter what was going on, he was going to give me what I needed to sustain me. And that was really comforting to just focus on that day and not try to think of the other things that needed to happen in the week.
That's great. It's a wonderful verse. That's awesome. Raymond, do you want to chime in as well?
Sure, and I'll add to that. The thing I've learned a lot through this is living one day at a time. Jesus tells us not to worry about tomorrow. He tells us to cast our anxieties upon him because he cares for us. He tells us when we're weary and heavy laden to come to him and he will give us rest. I also found a lot of comfort in Psalm 91. I won't read that. It's a fairly long psalm, but it's filled with comforting promises of God's protection and provision and watching over us. It's the psalm where he says he gives his angels charge over us. It's a psalm that's like a sandwich. It all these wonderful promises, and then it even talks about a pestilence and a plague, in the middle of it, of all this going on, and then the promises again. So the comforting promises of God around all of the intense things that we are experiencing right now. So I would also echo what Christy said, that you go to Scripture in these times and find that daily comfort from God's Word.
Yeah, I found a lot of the Christian life is not necessarily learning something new, but resting in the truths and the promises that we already have and learning how to, step into those and walk into those. So that's awesome. Sometimes we think that things are basic, but they're foundational, right? The foundational part of having peace is walking in the truths and promises of God. So awesome. Well, one of the specific questions that came up that has been anxiety inducing, at least for one person, but I know probably for a lot of us, has been this idea of wearing masks. And so the question came in is just, why doesn't everyone wear a mask? And there's lots of opinions, but Raymond, let's hear yours.
Well, like I said earlier when we were talking about this, it's a free country, and there are just going to be some people that choose not to wear masks. I think we've all been told by a variety of experts that wearing a mask is to protect others, not just ourselves. I've talked to medical professionals that I trust, and they've said, a mask doesn't keep you from getting the virus, but it does keep it from spreading. And I saw that there was one study before the peer review of the study that if everyone wore masks, the 85% of the spread of the virus would go away. Mm. So I think if they would publish something like that with, once the peer review is done, it might encourage people to wear masks. But I think we have to simply be responsible, our own, with ourselves, and make our choice. We can't control other people and what they're not going to do. And I've seen some horrid videos of people screaming at others in stores and things when they don't have a mask on. And I think we just need to wear a mask and protect ourselves and protect others through that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a hard one. I had to go to the store today, get some contact solution, and, I checked out and I didn't put my stuff. I just one thing, and I just, he scanned it without touching it. And it is hard. You go to a place that you're used to going, and now all of a sudden you're thinking about these things. And so it's just good to be reminded, right, that we do what we can do, but then you can only go so far. So, okay, so that's on the personal side. Again, lots of information on that last time, but we want to talk about some of these relationships within the family. And so for many of us, that first or that primary relationship in the home is one between you and your spouse. And, we're all processing this stuff individually, but we also have to process it together. And so a number of questions came in about that relationship dynamic between husband and wife. So here's the question. How can I get my spouse to understand that my emotions and worrying and anxiety about COVID are real and not something I can just forget about or turn off just like he can, right? What would you say to that person that's just struggling with that right now? And Raymond, you want to talk about that, and then maybe Carla?
Sure. When I read this question, Brian, the first thing that jumped out to me is, how can I get my spouse to understand? And none of us can force anyone else to understand us. We can't make anybody understand what we're feeling. What we can do is we can ask someone to listen to us and ask them, in a gentle way, and be able to say, would you mind giving me, 15 minutes? And you can, I can say a lot in 15 minutes. And then I just need you to share. I just need you to listen to me. And I don't really want any feedback. I just want you to listen, if you would do that. And rarely will somebody, say no to a request like that. And then you share, and you've done what you need to do. You've shared with your spouse what is going on. If you're trying to get them to understand, it won't work. It's you're trying to control somebody, and it just won't work. It'll just cause more conflict or tension in the relationship.
So Carla, what would you say to that question?
Yeah, and when I hear this question, I hear somebody wanting to be understood. And like Raymond said, you can't force someone else to understand you, but sometimes the way that you approach them can make it easier for them to hear you and really grasp some of the things that you're trying to communicate. So I often encourage couples to learn about Gottman's soft startup approach. It's an approach to communication that helps disarm defensiveness and your partner feeling attacked or minimizing what you're trying to communicate. And to do this, there are some very simple ways to do this. A couple of things to keep in mind. You want to make sure that you complain, you don't blame. So you focus on the actions and the behaviors, not the person's character. Another thing you want to be keeping in mind when you're using a soft startup approach is using an I statement versus a you statement. A you statement often will put someone in a defensive stance because they will feel attacked. So that would be, for example, saying, you never take out the trash. versus saying an I statement, which would be something along the lines of, I feel stressed when I see the trash still piled up, and I would really appreciate it if you could try taking it out twice a week. If you notice in that, it's clear, it's polite, it's expressing your need, but in a positive way. So that's some of the things to keep in mind if you're interested in using a soft startup approach with your partner.
Yeah, it's really difficult, right, to do that. I know I do a lot of premarital counseling. Just I'm not to you guys' level of understanding all that, but you know, that whole question of like this assertiveness, like it's important, right? In a relationship, you want to be able to know and care for your spouse, right? And you also though need to be known, so it's not always just a one-way street. And so we do this activity about, you know, both active listening, but also assertively saying. And it's an I wish it's an I wish exercise. It's, you know, I would really love it if, you know, it would make me feel loved and cared for if, and then you need to repeat back what you're hearing. So I think there is a lot in terms of how we go about talking that makes what we're about to say easier to have a conversation. So that's some really good stuff. Okay, moving right along. In the same vein, someone said, how can I keep from holding my feelings in about COVID because my spouse doesn't understand my anxiety, and then I blow up at them when I can't keep it in any longer. So this person, you know, the first person was wanting to, hey, I want to get them to understand. This person is like, I'm holding it in, I'm going to blow my top, right? What would you say to this person who just, I'm all pent up and I'm going to lose it? So Christy, you want to help me tackle that one?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, keeping what Carla and Raymond said in mind is very foundational because there's still a need to communicate, there's still a need to express. So remembering that, you know, I'm responsible for what I need to get off my chest, what I need to say, even if the other person is not receptive at this time, I need to do my part in making sure that I'm communicating what I need. And something else that I was thinking of as I was kind of reflecting on the question is if that one particular person that this person is thinking about is not receptive at this time, that doesn't mean that's a dead end. We can always talk to a very trusted friend. We can always, you know, reach out to someone in our Bible study who we feel extremely comfortable with. It's not just this one sole person that can hear me out and that's it. I think that's what's beautiful about the church. We're here to support, we're here to help each other. So if this person needs to express, you know, maybe find another avenue or another person to express what you need to express and start to get that out.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's this idea that, yes, in a relationship with a spouse, you need to communicate, right, what you need to communicate, but maybe to get the pressure out of the situation, you kind of start with somebody else first. Is that what you're saying?
That could be it. I mean, because if a person's tried to communicate with their spouse and it's still not feeling like they're being heard, that's not the only option, right?
Okay.
Something else that I was going to mention too is just having realistic expectations. You know, whenever you speak to an individual, but that something's very sensitive for the first time, they might not get it right away. So having a couple conversations around it whenever things have cooled off, or from time to time, can help soften the other person possibly to your needs and your sensitivities.
That's great. Thanks, Heather.
I was actually laughing because like a week ago, there was a little conflict between my husband and I had to walk away.
Just so you know, this is being recorded and can or may be used against you in a court of law. Just throwing it out there.
It's good. I promise. It's good. But no, so I had to walk away. And my husband came in to me and he's like, you know, like, are we okay? Because you're kind of giving me the cold treatment right now. And I said, well, we're okay. But if I talk to you right now, I'm going to say some things that are hurtful. And I don't want to do that. So you got to give me some time. And so it kind of brings me back to when we first got married and we're trying to deal with like how, as a newlywed, how to deal with conflict. And I remember, again, my thing is I need time and space to think. And so I would walk away and I'd be like, okay, God, help him to see how horrible he is. And then I'd be like, no, okay, God, you know, help me to talk to him in a respectful way. Okay, God, help me see my responsibility in this. now, Lord, help me go talk to him in a respectful way, and I had to bring it around to me rather than him, like you guys have been saying, change, get that person to change. No, like, how am I going to change my approach and process, like, what is it that I need to communicate, and Lord, help me communicate it well. And it became kind of a joke with us after a while, but it actually, even this whole situation has brought me back to going, let's go back to the roots of our marriage, when we first got married, and how I handled conflict a little bit better back then. So,
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, Carla, do you want to chime in? I know you do a lot of work with families and all that.
I really loved your story, Heather, because I think that's a lot of our stories, right? When it comes to relationships, we're two different individuals with two different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of even understanding the same words that we might be using. And so it's really important to take things slow sometimes, like Christy mentioned, sometimes the first time is not going to be the time that they understand you. And I have found in my own marriage that we tend to work through these kinds of gridlock issues one conversation at a time. And as we're going through every conversation over time, I find that we chip away at the issue little bit by little. We start to come together and we start to understand each other better. Sometimes it takes time to understand each other. And I think it can be frustrating, especially when we're also dealing with anxiety, fear, uncertainty, and stress, and, responsibilities. And so it's important to be checking in with yourself and reflecting with yourself, like, how am I doing right now? Am I feeling stressed? Because that might be contributing to why this is so triggering for me, why this is so upsetting for me. And then I also think that when there are going to be times where our partner may not fully understand our experience, but we still have a need. And so we can often ask ourselves, how can I meet this need? And Chrissy brought up a great idea of, going to a friend and talking to them about what you're going through. And Heather mentioned, taking a break in the middle of a discussion, because we find that in the middle of a heated discussion, our bodies actually get flooded with emotions, and it's hard to then be rational. It's hard then to talk through the issue and really hear each other out. And so when we take that break, it helps our bodies calm down. If you notice, like, your heart beating faster, or like you're a little bit like adrenaline running, it helps you calm down to take at least like a 20-minute break if you can, and then come back together, as Heather mentioned, with a much better mindset to work through the issue.
So adults can give themselves times out. That what we're saying? We can take a time out and be. I'm always giving it for my kids to say, we need to have some thinking time. Let's go think together. But I think that's a good idea, right? Give some space. That's great. Kind of along the same line, but just a little bit different nuance. Someone wrote, how do I manage frustration with not being on the same wavelength with managing COVID-related planning or even research and discussion? So kind of similar stuff, spouse relationship tension, but this one brought up specifically as they're trying to plan and think through things together. So Christy, do you want to chime in on that one?
Sure, absolutely. I think the first thing that came to mind, and it almost sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I think it's helpful to seek to understand the other individual first, then to be understood. Because I think a lot of times when we're trying to get things together, whether it's like our family or marriage or whatever, I know I'm guilty of this. I try to push my point out first, and I don't always take the role of listening and try to understand. But I've noticed that whenever, I put my ideas, my values just to the side for a little bit and try to really genuinely tune into the other person, start asking good questions as to like, that's interesting. Why are you going about it that way? Or can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm stepping into how, this other person is seeing it, and it's giving me more of an understanding of how loving and how they're having good intentions, even if it's different than mine. So, by hearing out the other person first, what mostly happens too is they give you that permission to share your thoughts. And once everything's out on the table, that's when, you know, changes could be made, plans can be made with both, you know, thought processes in mind.
That's really good. Everybody wants to be heard, right? I know after I get off what my chest is, and I'm like, oh, I can listen to you now. Sneaky.
Yeah. But it works.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Carla, Raymond, want to chime in on that one too?
Yeah, one thing I would add is that, you know, we need to work together, especially as families. Adversity is one of those things that can either pull us apart or it can bring us closer together. And so one of the ways we can work together as a family to decide, okay, how are we going to manage being safe? How are we going to manage adjusting to this pandemic? Can be by having like a family check-in or a family meeting. You know, this could be done once a week, bi-weekly, depending on the family, what works best for everyone. And during this meeting, everyone would get an opportunity to voice their concerns, to voice their perspectives. And as a family, the hope is that you would work together, trying to consider everyone and compromising so that everyone gets a little bit of what they need in the midst of very difficult circumstances.
That's great.
And one thing I will add to that is when it comes to like teenagers and anybody above that age, you know, it's important to try to see if you can bring them into the decision making, into the planning, so that they can also own it for themselves. They're at an age where they're able to think a lot more critically, and so helping them grow and learn can be one way to do that can be by bringing them into the process of decision making and planning and working through how do we adjust to this new life that we're dealing with right now.
Brian, I'll add, frustration is the emotion that's generated in every one of us when I can't get things to go my way. I can't get other people, I can't get circumstances to go my way, so frustration builds up inside of me. And in this type of a situation that is presented in this question, we have to give space for everyone to be able to share their thoughts and their feelings and explore, draw them out. Why do they think what they think? Rather than stating an opposing position, once you position yourself against someone else, you're in a power struggle. You're trying to convince them to think the way you do. And to allow everyone to have their own perspectives. There's such a wide range of perspectives on what we're dealing with COVID. And it's hard to know what the truth really is, because the people you want to trust, they're changing their stories a lot. And so it's just important. Again, we've all said, listen and understand, and really work to understand before trying to be understood. And give everyone the freedom and try to find the good in what everyone is sharing.
That's really good. One question, Raymond, I'm going to throw this at you. It wasn't one that came in, but it's based on our conversation, is because we're about ready to move on from the spouse to the kids. Yeah. But if I'm at that spot where, you know, I'm thinking one thing and my wife is thinking another, yeah, and we're just not at the same page, right? Like, what do you do to manage that as best as possible? You know, I've maybe the conversations have been had. I've said my piece. She said her piece. We both have perspectives. They're just different. Yeah. What do we do?
I would say simply, you agree to disagree. Carla mentioned Dr. John Gottman earlier in the Soft Startup. And he's the foremost researcher in the world today on marriage and family. And his research has proven that 70% of all differences in every marriage are unresolvable, which is a stark number. You know? Wow. And so, you know, one of the keys to a fulfilling and happy marriage is learning to live with the unresolved differences, and you know, focus on the relationship. The relationship is the most important thing. Not being right or wrong, not winning and getting somebody to have to agree with me.
We're talking about those regressive behaviors, you know, like at one point when they had the structure with school and the regular life, things that they were struggling with were finally beginning to kind of calm down, tame down. But now that life is uncertain again, they're not in their regular structure, there's kind of a digression. How can you help, parents, with those regressive behaviors when the parent themselves is feeling, anxious and overwhelmed, let alone having to, restructure for this child?
It's a very good question. The first thing I want to say is that if you do see regression behaviors in your child during this time, it's normal. And it's almost to be expected to some degree, right? Because these are not normal times. Things are very up in the air right now for everyone. Everyone's feeling uncertainty. Some are feeling stress, anxiety, and fear. And that, whether your child fully understands what's going on, they can sense all of that around them. And so it's normal if you see regression in your child in certain ways. I think that during this time, we want to have patience, and we don't want to get too alarmed if we see our child, turning to a behavior that we thought that they had moved past. We want to sometimes adjust our expectations and understand that they're just trying to do their best, and we can help them along that process, but it's not helpful if we feel like we have an agenda of getting them to a certain place right away. Sometimes it's important to just be like, okay, this is where they're at, and that's okay. If they were able to work through it once, they can work through it again. But it's important for us to not be too alarmed, because they can also read that in us.
Absolutely. Raymond or Christy, did you have any thoughts also on that?
I was going to just say that, as Carla said, it's normal. And, we might be able to see it as a regressive behavior, but what it really is a coping mechanism. They're feeling a loss of security, or they're scared. And we don't need to get them out of it. We just need to nurture them in it, and be reassuring to them that we're working hard to keep them safe, and we're right here for them during those times. But not to try to get them to see it or get out of it, just to meet them in it.
Yeah, and something I would add to that is, maybe providing language to help them express themselves. I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling worried, and just providing an alternative to the behavior that they're exhibiting now, and using other methods to share what they need.
Yeah. Years ago, I really struggled with one of my sons who had major, very strong will. Let's just put it that way. And an older friend of mine, they had a child who struggled with the same thing. And I watched how they handled that. And what we found is that with a child like that, the more you got on them, almost the worse they became. Like you could try to correct it at first, but when they feel like after a while they just can no longer meet your expectations or your criteria, they feel defeated, and so then they just continue to get worse and worse. So we ended up having to do the very opposite of what we as a parent were taught to do or thought was the right thing, and start finding good things to say, like, hey, you held your pencil right today. Good for you, or hey, you cleaned your dish without being told. Thank you. But like finding those little things. And so they suddenly were like, okay, I can please them, and I will try to do better again. And it was hard, but it was interesting how just those simple affirmations, even though they didn't particularly deserve it, were the very things that switched the behavior back on, I think. And when we're all feeling anxious and frustrated, it's immediate for us to kind of lose it and just be like, I'm done. But instead we have to go to like, no, I still love you. You're wonderful. Even though inside my head I'm going, ah, it's just hard. So anyway, on that particular note too, is we're together 24/7, and it does create a lot of conflict and tension. So give us a little bit of help there. And especially with maybe a couple of different age groups, when you're thinking about the younger age group, up to middle school, and then middle school to like high school and college, if you can kind of help with that as we're navigating, all of us together. I mean, because you have college kids that even came home too, so you got used to being empty nesters, and now they're back. So how do you handle that 24/7 with your lovelies?
Okay. I'll jump in and start that one, Heather. As you said, it is difficult because the dynamics, we just go through a major shift in dynamics in the family when COVID happened, and we all are having to learn how to relate differently. As long with the high school and the college age kids, and sometimes young adults are back home because they lost their jobs or for some reason. When you're dealing with the older children, there needs to be a lot of autonomy given. And they're used to living, college students especially, and young adults are used to living on their own, and they've been living on their own for at least a year, and maybe longer than that. And now they're coming back in. One of my professors many years ago said that when we go back into our family units, we actually grow down emotionally. So we start to feel like a child again, in the presence of our parents, and we'll take on roles from that. And sometimes that can cause tension and conflict because we can feel, younger people can feel like they're being parented when they're really not being parented, and they don't want to be parented. And I think us as adults need to, not try to be a parent, but to build an adult-adult relationship in those times. As I mentioned earlier, allowing people to have your kids to have their opinions. They may have different opinions now than they did when they were younger, different perspectives than you, and giving freedom for that to happen. Not expecting them to be what you want them to be, allowing them to be who they are. When we were talking about this question earlier in the week, I was thinking about how, we really need to be listeners first, listening to what each other says. We need to be in a mode of giving out of ourselves to each other, not trying to get something from someone else. We don't need to be, the opposite of listening is telling. We must be listening versus trying to tell someone other things. Making requests of others versus making demands. Allowing everyone to have input as to what we're going to do for dinner, what games are we going to play, what movies are we going to watch. Everybody has a choice because they've all had freedom of choice, the older kids have, for some period of time, and they need to be treated like that during this time. And it will really help in everyone getting along. Everybody feels like they're being valued, and their contribution is important within the family.
I once had someone tell me, work smarter, not harder. And this is a hard thing to navigate for parents. And so, we got to be clever about it. We really do. And I often encourage parents, involve your kids in activities that you would normally be doing, such as cooking, cleaning, projects around the home. Make it fun for them. I find that when you can make it fun for a kid, they will do almost anything. Even cleaning can be fun for a kid. Make it a game. See who can clean faster. Have like a 5-minute cleaning game in every single room, and you'll find how quickly you pick up around the house. But you can also do fun things with the family, especially younger kids. You want to get more creative with them. And so you could do a fort in the middle of the living room, a tent in the backyard, a scavenger hunt. You could do a virtual game night with their friends or other family members. And you can also do like a family field day. I highly recommend 2 words, water balloons. I don't know a kid who does not like water balloons. And so get fun with your kids. Enjoy it yourself, because everyone's stressed out. Everyone's tense. Everyone's dealing with so much. we do need to distract ourselves and enjoy things in life how we would normally do. And so we need to bring that back into our lives, in small creative ways that we can still do during this pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's been really good to hear what you're talking, kind of like ownership, a little bit of structure, and then fun in there, which I think is so important. We talked about that a little bit last week too, and finding that kids do better when there are some of those boundaries, but still making that feeling of independence for them, and ownership and stuff. So I love all of that. I actually, our boys, we've learned to give them projects when they're getting bored and starting to fight. It's like, okay, I've got something fun for you to do, a project. And yes, we actually painted the side of our deck together and stuff, and it was fun, and we were kind of singing together, and or like I actually challenged the kids to keep their bathroom clean for 2 weeks straight, and then I'd get them Dairy Queen, and they amazingly did it. And they'd sing songs when they did it, because we made it into a game for them. And so those are really important things to be doing right now. But then, yeah, the game experience or activities that aren't all about the work side of it. And I struggle with that personally, because I'm a doer. And so I'm like, always like, okay, my kids, what can I get you to do for me today? But I do have to be very cognizant about saying, okay, what can we do that you enjoy today too? Like the water guns or balloons or whatever you want to do, and fun things like that. So really, really helpful, you guys. I really appreciate the input there. So just now we're going to manage over and kind of wrapping things a little bit up with people outside of your marriage, your kids, and now the people beyond that. Brian, I don't know if you want to take this back, if you're able to.
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
Hey everybody, those who are flexible will not be bent out of shape. So thanks for flexing with me. Sorry, I'm on my phone now. So yeah, so one of the questions that came in is now there's not just your household, right, but other people in your family. And so this is a difficult one right now. I'll talk about a few, I'm actually going to jump down here to Christy and Carla. I want to talk about first this idea of how do you talk with family members about different levels of comfort, whether it's the PPE stuff or safeguards, social distancing, and then we'll get back to like how we talk about grandparenting and stuff like that. But let's talk about that. How do you have some good conversations with family members? Because family is sometimes that first circle that people start to say, how are we going to interact? But what happens when you're on different wavelengths with that? So Christy, you want to help us out?
You do.
Christy,
I can't hear
you're muted, hun.
There we go.
There we go.
Sorry, I was enjoying listening to everyone's responses, but I forgot to unmute myself again.
There you go.
But one of the things that I was saying was, it goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier in today's discussion, how every person has different viewpoints, different perspectives, and just understanding that that's just how it is sometimes. So as I was thinking through this question, I thought it would be helpful for each family to come up with their own game plan, right? Because no two families are the same. Even when it comes to house rules outside of COVID-19, like everyone's house operates differently. And I don't think it's any different when it comes to trying to make a decision about these things. So starting with your immediate family, talk about what everyone feels comfortable with, what they feel okay with, and coming up with a game plan around that. And if extended family, if they share a different perspective, recognizing once again that's their household, their thoughts, but this is what we're going to do in our family, and just kind of lovingly kindly sharing those boundaries, because that's what needs to be done for your family, and what they might do with their family is different. So.
That's awesome. Carla, you want to jump in there too?
Yeah, I often think about something that I learned while I was in grad school, but it wasn't in school. It was at work. I worked in a restaurant during grad school, and it was a fine dining restaurant. So customer service was an absolute must for us. And it was really, really, really important. So I noticed that there were times that I would work with customers that would be upset or frustrated. Sometimes they would be rude or disrespectful towards me. And I noticed that when that would happen, I could still control myself. I could keep my cool. It was hard. It's always hard when you're in that situation, but I could do it. I could still speak with them with respect. I could be kind, and I could try to really hear them out to address their issues. And the reason why I was so good at doing that was because I had a very strong incentive. In this case, it was a financial incentive. Now, when it comes to our personal life and our family, our friends, so often we have an incentive there as well to be respectful, to be kind, to be considerate, even when we're not seeing eye to eye, even when they're frustrated or angry or disrespectful towards us. And our incentive in that case is how much we value that relationship, and so if we can be respectful, if we can practice self-control and communicate in a way that is considerate of others, when we have a financial incentive, we can definitely do it when we have a personal incentive. I think it's just about reframing the way we look at the situation, but we also have to consider that we have to respect other people and where they're at and their decision making. We can't control anything anyone ever does. We may want to, and we may try to, but at the end of the day, we do need to respect other people and the fact that they might have a different way of looking at the situation. Always keeping in mind that relationships are more valuable than a disagreement. Relationships are more valuable than an idea. And so putting the relationship first, even when you do have different perspectives.
I've also found it where, as a parent, obviously you and a spouse talking about other people in the family, you can process things with all the love and the stuff in the background that you have, and talk about, and there's a little disagreement here. But if my kids are hearing that, right, and they're hearing kind of like, oh, what about this? A lot of times, at least the younger the kids are, they're reasoning a lot more in the concrete and abstract, And so I just know that I think first things first, if you are processing like external, like larger family, things, grandma and grandpa, aunts and uncles, things like that, be wise on where you're processing that, because you are shaping your view, right, of their grandparents or aunts and uncles, as you talk about those things. So if you're on the more conservative side of things and someone else is more thinking, oh, everything's fine, you don't want to vilify people in your own family because it's only your perspective, right? So one, be careful, right, of how you're processing. And then I would just say focus on the things that you can do as opposed to the things that you can't. Maybe, grandma and grandpa just don't feel safe to come on over, but they are dying to be grandparents, right? And so what are the things that you can do, even if you can't, have them come over and give a hug? So that was actually one of our kind of other questions I want to kind of come back to, is all these new social distancing guidelines. How can I, as a grandmother, this is a question coming in at me, how can I, as a grandmother, help my grandchildren from afar? What are ways that I can be an encouragement? So Raymond and Carl, you want to take those?
Sure, Brian. Grandparents, I think, can be really creative during these times. I've talked to a number of people through this that are grandparents. They can send cards. They can FaceTime. They can do a Zoom meeting with all of their grandkids at the same time. as we're doing a Zoom meeting tonight. Zoom it's not real expensive to set up. One that's for you can last for more than an hour. I think it's only $15 or something like that. And if you use it for free, you get 40 minutes, and that can be a lot of time between a grandparent and their kids. Another thing I've seen grandparents do that is just go and sit in a yard with them, and be socially distanced in a backyard, or sit out front and let the kids look at you through the window, and you be able to see them, there. Or have the kids come over to your place and look at you through the window if you can't travel. But you have to be very creative. There are things you can order gift packages through Amazon for your grandkids. Send them care packages, things like that. So be very creative to let them know you're thinking about them and reaching out to them.
That's great. Well, it is 8:00 on the dot. And those are honestly the vast majority of questions that we have. But I wanted to, again, come back to this question here at the end is, in the midst of all this, again, we're all facing stress. And last time I asked at the end of our first session was to say, hey, when's it the right time, to consider doing, not just talking with other people, but maybe talking with a counselor. And so I want to ask that same question for those that might be new here, but then also, because we are talking about family relationships, what should I be looking for in maybe a child or a spouse or someone to try and say, this might be a time where I might want to suggest, let's talk with a counselor about that.
So Carla and Christy, do you guys want to jump in with the kids? I'll say, for adults, and I said this last time, it's a very simple thing. When you can't function, when you've tried everything to function in a relationship, and it's just not working, and tensions are rising and things are getting worse and not better, that's the time to reach out to a counselor. All of our work is being done by video, as we're doing tonight, or by phone, but we're doing a lot of video counseling, and a lot of. I was telling Heather before we started, we've had a lot of new referrals this week, as we endure through even another week of the lockdown. So feel free to reach out if you're really having a hard time. And I'll let Carla and Christy address the answer with kids.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that if you're noticing your child having difficulties in adjusting during this time, or if you notice certain behaviors like the ones that I mentioned previously, but I also want to mention like nightmares is also something else to look out for. If they're struggling and you're finding that you've given them the tools that you have and they're still having some struggle with that challenge, then it can be a good time to consider counseling. And we are working remotely as well with young individuals. And sometimes I have found that it can actually go better remotely because it's really interesting how a young person can be really comfortable in their own room, in their own setting. And sometimes, what's in the room can be part of the counseling experience. It can help build the relationship with that young person. When we're working with young people, especially remotely, we have to get creative, and we definitely have found ways to make it work. But parents also are a part of that process, and parents help us by setting their kids up for success. Making sure that the system is working for their session, that they have privacy, that they have the materials that they might need for that session. So most of the time I'm asking parents, make sure they have blank paper and drawing utensils so that we can use it in our session and get creative, even when we're working remotely.
Christy, any thoughts for parents?
I feel like Carla did a good job recapping. I mean, as with teenagers, because I really love working with them, just maybe some irritability, maybe withdrawing, maybe lashing out a little bit more. That could be signs that they might need some extra support. But very similar to Carla what said too, I'm noticing that because there's more opportunity to talk and we're relying less on the games and just kind of the bells and whistles, that I'm able to have really good and genuine conversations. I'm not sure if it's the social interaction that they miss so much, but they're opening up a lot more and really talking about some of those deeper things that we might not have been able to talk about if we were face to face, compared to, the Zoom call. So those would be some of the things to look out for: the irritability, lashing out, maybe withdrawing.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, thank you all for hopping on here. Just as a real quick reminder, in the midst of all this, even if you don't know somebody that's been hospitalized or passed away because of COVID, all of us are experiencing loss. And so next week, we're going to be talking about grief and loss. And we'll be talking, obviously, in the context of death and illness and that, but just in general, just this idea of loss. So, and how to go well. And so I think you don't know how to do it. And even when you do it, there's not like automatic right way to do it, right? But there's some ways to do it in a healthy way. And so help people kind of work through some of that. And so I want to encourage you, if you haven't signed up, the same spot you sign up for this, you can just sign up for a new link will be given if you go ahead and go to our relief page, our COVID relief page on our website, and just sign up for next week. So it'll be our third and final conversation. Again, I just thank everybody from Whitestone for being here. And again, I would love to kind of just pray us out, pray us home, if you will, and pray for you this next week. So let me pray, and then we'll call it a day. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your love for us. And like we started off the conversation with just thinking about limitations and just the idea of your faithfulness, Lord. And it is true that even in the unstable things that we face in our life and even in our hearts and minds, thank you that the bedrock thing that we can stand upon is your faithfulness, your promises. And Lord, your promise to be near to the brokenhearted. You promise to leave us, forsake us, and that your love is always with us. And so, ease, and we're extending us to the people that love. And so we ask for the well and the great ability to rest personally, our hearts and thoughts and our minds, your care, and that you would help to be instruments of peace and that grace in our households, in our families, that we would be lights that shine, and that we would cause more light to be in our interaction with one another. Lord, thank you for tonight. Pray for everyone who's given an hour of their time here, that you would help them to apply the most important parts of what they've heard tonight to their life. Looking forward with peace and with joy in their future. And so we pray all this, trusting that you are with us in all things. In Christ, amen.